This world is cursed.
Amen.
You know, when sin entered into this world, it changed this world from a paradise to a place filled with pain, a place filled with hurt, betrayal, a place that was frustrating, a place that was filled with shame and even anger. And we know that some pain is brought on by ourselves. You know, by our poor decisions, sometimes by our rebellion, by our own sin. But sometimes we are hurt through no direct action of our own. Sometimes it's by a freak occurrence, as happened with the little boy that we mentioned earlier. Sometimes by poor decisions of other people. Sometimes by the hate and anger of others. And sometimes just by sinfulness that people get involved in. And we see a situation like that in God's Word. Well, we see it several times. But in one particular book, we see this situation really kind of demonstrated for us in a very strong way. And that is in the book of Job. And now the book of Job is one that's sometimes hard for me to understand. And it's kind of hard for me to comprehend what was going on there and why it happened. I mean, here was a man, Job, who was blameless and upright. And that wasn't just everybody on earth's opinion. That was God's opinion himself. Not that Job had never sinned, because we all sin and fall short of the glory of God, but it seems that in his life there was no habitual sin that he just kept being involved in. And when he did sin, he evidently did what he needed to do to make it right with God. And so, because of his relationship with God, he was very blessed. As a matter of fact, it says that he was a very wealthy man. Now, when we look at this, we maybe don't quite understand it because we measure wealth in a totally different way today. It's all about our bank account and how much money we have in our bank account or in our, our stock portfolio or whatever. But in Job's day, this is how they measured wealth. He had 7,000 sheep. Okay? 7,000 sheep. That's a lot of sheep. But the one that really kind of gets me, he had 3,000 camels. Can you imagine 3,000 camels? I mean, just one camel to me would be pretty amazing. Just have one camel. But he had 3,000 of them. That's got to be a big herd. I can't imagine even where you keep them all at. But 3,000 camels. Then it says he had 500 yoke of oxen, which I guess, I'm assuming that a yoke is 2. All right, so that's 1,000 oxen. He had 500 donkeys. Why anybody would want 500 donkeys, I don't know. But he had 500 donkeys. Plus, he was very blessed with 10 children. Now, today we might not see that necessarily as a blessing. But in that day, especially, it wasn't very much a blessing. And I think it's always a blessing when you have children. But he had 10 of them, 7 sons and 3 daughters. And so the part that is really hard for us to understand, for me to understand, is that when Satan comes in and God kind of brags about Job a little bit, Satan says, well, that's because he's had it easy. You've taken really good care of him. Look at all the stuff he has. You take all that stuff away from him, he's not going to be faithful to you. And God says, oh yeah? Well, let's try it. Let's see what happens. And God knew what was going to happen, all right? But can you imagine the day that Job had? Because he starts getting these servants coming into him. And the first servant comes in and he tells him, he says, the Sabians have come in and they've taken all of your oxen and all of your donkeys. Right? So he's lost all his oxen, he lost all his donkeys. And then in comes another servant right on his heels and says, Master says, a fire came from heaven and it burned up all your sheep. Yep. All right? And then another one comes in right after that and he says that another group of people had come in, some other robbers had come in and taken all of his camels. All 3,000 camels were just gone. But then, before that servant even got done speaking, in comes another servant. I want you to understand that every time they came in, they also said all the rest of the servants were gone. So he lost all of his workers, he lost all of his animals, but now this last servant comes in. And he tells how Job's children, all 10 of them, had gathered together at one of their houses and was having a big party, just enjoying being together, when a strong wind came and blew the house down and destroyed it, killing all of the children. All 10 of his children. And all the servants. He was the only one to survive. Just one servant to come and bring him the news that now his day he had lost every blessing that he'd had. All of his livestock, all of his servants, and what's probably most dear to his heart, his children. Gone, just like that. And yet, Job's faith doesn't waver. So God allows Satan to afflict Job with these painful sores from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. Everywhere he's got these painful sores. And they're so painful that the only comfort that he receives, the only way he can get any relief from the pain, is to take broken pieces of pottery and scrape them over his skin. It's the only way he gets any relief from it. And so his wife tells him, she said, you should just curse God and die. But here is Job's statement to that. Right? Here's Job's statement. He says, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? Think about that. It says, should we accept good from God and not trouble? Isn't that interesting? Here's a man of faith. A man who still puts his faith in God, who still trusts God, and realizes that God is God. I'd struggle with that. If I lost all of that in one day, I would have a real struggle. Then to have my health taken away from me, I don't know how I'd deal with that. I just don't know. And evidently, I'm not as good as Job because God's not letting it happen. But if ever somebody needed some love from someone, it was Job. And I hate to say it, but it sounded like he wasn't really getting it from his wife. She told him to curse God and die. And so what we hear about next, we hear about Job. He has some 3 friends that get together and come to see him. And so I'm going to read this to you here, okay? In just a moment about that's coming, but if ever somebody needs, we see those 3 friends coming. And friends are important when we are struggling. When we are hurting, when we are in pain, friends are important. In Proverbs 17:17 it says this. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for a time of adversity. You get that? I kind of like how the International Children's Bible put it. They put it this way. A friend loves you all the time. A brother is always there to help you. Always there to help you. And that's what we need. We need friends like that. Friends who are like brothers, who are always there for us. Always ready to help us in our times of need. In Proverbs 18:24 it says this. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin. But there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. And all of us need friends like that. Those friends who are with us through thick and thin, that are always there for us. And so Job's friends come to him. They come to him. When someone is hurting, the best thing that we can do is to show our love for them by showing up. To be a friend. To be there. So I want us to look at a few things of what being a friend is all about. And the first thing is that a friend is a silent presence. Now that may sound kind of strange, but I want you to hear what happens with Job's friends here when they first come. And I'm going to read this to you from Job chapter 2, starting with verse 11, says this. When Job's 3 friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite, heard about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and met together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. When they saw him from a distance, they could hardly recognize him. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. Then they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him, because they saw how great his suffering was. So when they see Job, they are all upset. It bothers them. And so what do? They come and they sit down by him. Okay. They sit down on the ground next to him, and they don't say a word. Don't say a word. Because they know he's suffering. And so they're just quiet there. You know, sometimes the best thing we can do is to silently sit with someone who is hurting. When somebody is in pain, sometimes it's best just to have somebody just come and sit with you. I remember when I was in 6th grade, we lived in Charleston, Missouri. And I don't know, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade were just rough years for me. I don't know why, they just were. Going through puberty and all that kind of stuff. I don't know what it was, but something just made it rough for me. And I can remember sometimes I would just go out on the back steps and I would just sit there. And we had a dog, her name was Bessie. She was part Basset Hound and I think part Beagle. I don't know, some kind of mutt. But anyhow, she looked kind of like a Basset Hound, though. She was kind of long and had these big old ears. But she would just come up and sit with me. You know, just sit there. And not... Of course, she couldn't say a word. But if she'd have said anything,
she did.
But you know, she didn't try to lick me. She didn't try to do anything. She just came and just seemed to know that I just needed somebody to sit with me. And she would just sit there, and we would just sit there together. And if I was feeling lonely, you know, we just kind of felt nice having her there. If I was upset about something, it just felt good having her there. You know, sometimes just having somebody sit there with us in our struggles is all that we really need. There was a man who had lost 3 of his sons at various times in his life. And he wrote a book called The View from a Hearse. And he said this. He said, I was sitting, torn by grief. Someone came and talked to me of God's dealings, of why it happened, of hope beyond the grave. He talked constantly. He said things I knew were true. I was unmoved, except to wish he'd go away. He finally did. Another came and sat beside me. He didn't talk. He didn't ask leading questions. He just sat beside me for an hour or more, listened when I said something, answered briefly, prayed simply, and left. I was moved. I was comforted. I hated to see him go. See, when we don't know what to say, the best thing is to say nothing. To just be there. And there are times when we come to people, we know they're hurting, we know they're in pain, and we don't know what to say. And for some reason we seem like we've got to say something, and so we work things out. But sometimes the best thing is just to sit there and to listen. Sometimes just sit there. Job's friends just sat there for 7 days beside Job. He didn't say a word. And that was comforting to Job. But then they decided to talk. And that's when everything kind of went south for them. I mean, somebody said they were great friends until they opened their mouths.
Yep.
And if you read the rest of the story, the rest of the book, you'll find out what we're talking about. They started to blame him. They said things that were hurtful to him. They were sure that he had done something to deserve what he was going through. And so they kind of messed things up. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about some things that we shouldn't do and shouldn't say when somebody is hurting. Because sometimes we do these things. We say things and we do things that we think are helpful, but they're not always so. And we're going to talk about some of those things. But I want us to look today at some other qualities besides just sitting there that we as friends to somebody who is hurting, how we can demonstrate our love for them as our brother and sister. And so We talk about being that silent presence. But also being a friend is sharing our life with them. You know, real friends share their lives with one another. There is a fellowship. We share things that are going on in our life. And there's a tendency sometimes when somebody is hurting to focus in on their pain. To just talk about what they're going through. And what we fail to see is that they need to know what's going on in our life. They need sometimes to see that others are going through things too. You know, we shouldn't hesitate to share our own joys and our own struggles. But that doesn't mean that we minimize what they're going through. We should never minimize and just say, oh, it's not really that bad. And we shouldn't try to one-up them. You know what I mean? You know, well, yeah, what you're going through is bad, but boy, I knew this other person that they went through this, this, and this. You know, sometimes we do that. We talk about other things. I think it's interesting when somebody says they're going to have surgery, people start telling them about things that went wrong in other people's surgery. I never thought that was a real good idea. But we need to be there and share with them. You know, when we go through struggles, it's rather comforting to know that others have struggles too. And to see that there's still joy when our joy seems to have left us. You know, I got to thinking about those yoke of oxen that Job had. If you ever think about it, oxen, when they are in a yoke together, they're to pull something. There's a burden that they're carrying. If one has to carry it, it's really hard. And if the other one has to carry it, then it's really hard. But when they both share it together, they each have a burden to share. They each have a burden to bear, but they're sharing it together. And it makes it easier for them to pull it on. Galatians 6:2 says this, carry each other's burdens, and this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And so when we get together and we share with one another, we can help one another out. Even those who are really hurting, sometimes it's good to get their mind off of that and see that there are other people who are struggling as well. And so we carry each other's burdens together. But being a friend is also being loyal. It's interesting when a tragedy or a trial comes to people, it seems people are always there at the beginning. You know? When something happens, everybody comes and everybody's there for a short period of time, but then, after a while, and usually it's not a very long while, they begin to disappear. Even though the pain and the hurt are still there. And we're bad about that. We are very bad as people. We go there right now, but then we kind of lose interest and we move on to the next. We see the same thing with TV news. You know, we have some kind of big disaster and everybody's all focused in on it for a few days. All the news, you know, it's 24 hours a day, all about this thing. Then all of a sudden there's nothing because something else has happened over here. You know, when we went on our mission trip to Pearlington, Mississippi, we were going down there to do help people who had been through Hurricane Katrina. It was 3 years after the hurricane. And what was interesting is that there were still people who had homes destroyed.
Exactly.
There were still houses that had not been touched. And yet, there weren't very many groups down there doing anything. When it first happened, you knew everybody was doing stuff, having, getting together loads of water and different things to take down there, and all kinds of things went on for the first few months. And then nothing happened. 3 years later, there were a few church groups down there. Government was gone. They weren't doing much. There weren't any other groups. Just a few church groups down there doing something. And the people were still needing help. Proverbs 17:17, which we read earlier, I want to read it again to you. It says, this is from the International Children's Bible. It says, a friend loves you all the time. A brother is always there for you. In other words, they're there for the long haul. They're not there just for the beginning. They are loyal to you. They're going to stay with you till you get through this. And that's why last week we talked about our love for God being so important when we want to love others. Because that's what keeps us going. When we really love God and we know how much He loves us, that enables us to have the power to keep going so we don't get tired, so we don't get burned out, because we know we're doing it for God Himself. Because what Jesus said, even as you do it, the release of these brothers of mine, you're doing it for me. So we need to be loyal. But being a friend is also forgiving. Being a friend is forgiving. You know, when people are hurting, they're not always the easiest to be around. Understand what I mean? You know, an animal, when they get hurt, if you've ever seen it, you know, they get hit by a car or something, it's sometimes dangerous to go near them because in their pain, they lash out at anybody who comes to try to help them. And the thing is that a lot of people are the same way. We humans often do the same thing. We blame others for our pain. We say hurtful things to those who are trying to help us. We're rude, we're mean to those who are caring for us. And it's just because the pain just kind of comes out. And so sometimes it's easier for us to say, well, they don't even appreciate what I'm trying to do for them. They don't even want me around, so I'm just going to leave them alone and not do anything. But guess what? We need to be forgiving of them when they come back because they are hurting. In 1 Peter 3:9 it says this, don't do wrong to anyone to pay them back for doing wrong to you. Or don't insult anyone to pay them back for insulting you. But ask God to bless them. Do this because you yourselves were chosen to receive His blessing. Get that? But ask God to bless them. Do this because you yourselves were chosen to receive the blessing. It is easy to just want to quit helping when we feel we're not appreciated or being taken advantage of. But here we're told to pay back with blessing, not in kind. You get that? And when somebody's rude to us, we don't get rude back to them. We give them a blessing. When somebody yells at us, we don't yell back at them. We give them a blessing. We forgive and we continue to love. Someone has said that forgiveness flows from forgiveness. Get the point of that? Forgiveness flows from forgiveness. In other words, we have been forgiven. And because God has forgiven us, we forgive those who hurt us. In other words, because we've been forgiven by God, we forgive one another. And we bless one another even when we don't deserve it. Because God blessed us when we don't deserve it. Get that? Maybe they don't deserve it. Maybe they are rude. Maybe they're mean. Maybe they're not very grateful for what you're doing for them. But we forgive them. And we bless them because God forgives us and blesses us. And we definitely don't deserve that. So a friend is forgiving. And being a friend is also bringing cheer. It's interesting, when I visit families who have lost someone, I find it interesting how much laughter there is when we get together and talk. You know, isn't that interesting? You know, we talk about things and pretty soon there's laughter because we bring up this or we bring up this thing that happened or this thing they did or how they did these things. And it just brings a little bit of laughter to us as we remember that person. Proverbs 17:22 says, a joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. Now that doesn't mean we should make light of someone's pain or their struggle, but there are times when laughter can be the best medicine. So we shouldn't be afraid to sometimes laugh a little bit. There's nothing wrong with it. Even in the middle of hurting, we all could use a good laugh. And last thing I want us to understand is Jesus is our friend. Jesus is our friend. In John 15:15, he said this, no longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing. But I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father, I've made known to you. See what he says? He says, we're not servants any longer, we are his friends. We are his friends. And earlier he said this in John 15. He said, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends. And isn't that exactly what Jesus did? He laid his life down for who? His servants? No, his friends. Us. Because he loves us so very much. Our friend Jesus demonstrated to us what it takes to be a friend. To give up ourselves. To sacrifice for one another. And I really believe that we can't do that on our own. But with the Holy Spirit's help, we can. We can do far more than what we even begin to imagine that we can do because the Holy Spirit enables us to do what only God can do. So when we love God, we are able to love our brothers and sisters without giving up. And when we're going through terrible days, we know that we are never alone. We have a friend who is closer than a brother, and his name is Jesus. He stays with us through thick and thin, when we are strong and when we are weak. He stays with us when we're faithful and when we are not. He is there. He gives us life. He is loyal. He forgives. He brings joy. He is our friend. So if we want to be a friend to others, we need to be like Jesus. We need to allow him to change us and make us into his image, to be like him. We need to follow him where he goes so that we can be a friend just as Jesus is a friend to all of us. When we're going through pain, we need a friend. So I hope you can be that friend to someone. And I hope that when you go through times of trouble, you'll find a friend. First of all, Jesus. But secondly, your brothers and sisters. We need to be there for one another. That's what the church is all about. That's why we are here together, to help each other through those times. Because this world is cursed. Bad things are going to happen to us. But God loves us. He's given us one another to get through those times until we get to that place where there is no more pain, no more sorrow, no more crying. And we long for that time to come. Maybe today you're struggling with some things. Maybe you're hurting. And maybe you need a friend. And we just ask you to come forward. We want to talk with you. We want to help you however we can. But sometimes, people have hurts they don't tell anybody about. And we can't help you if we don't know. So if you want to come forward, we got people willing to pray with you. If you need Jesus in your life to be that friend for you, he says come. He says, come all ye who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So why don't you just come? We're going to sing What a Friend We Have in Jesus. Why don't you come with us?